Alick Chingapi is a consultant by profession and an aspiring African traveler and writer. In the very first book he has penned down, titled Through a Black Iris, where he takes the reader with him on a journey he took when he traveled the continent, following the Cairo to Cape Town route using only public transport. Well, the compilation of his experiences include him being conned by taxi drivers, to being offered food by strangers on the streets, and he joins me now in studio to help us unpack this book. A very good morning to you, Alick. Great chatting to you. Thank you so much for joining us and welcome.
Thank you for having me here.
Why did you decide to document your travel experiences around the world, around the continent, I beg your pardon?
I wanted to share the story of being an African traveling in Africa, and what it would mean if I would encounter what some people term Ubuntu, how I would be treated. And it was also a way for me to settle back into the world, if I may call it that. After spending 4 or 5 months on the road, I found it difficult to settle back in after having been outside of South Africa and traveling for so long. So the book was just also a way for me to kind of, let it all go and put it down somewhere.
Yeah, and it still boggles the mind, such bravery. And in the book you also wanted to establish if white travelers are treated differently from black travelers in the different African countries. What did you discover?
I discovered that we are treated the same. I honestly thought that I had this impression, because I'd read on blogs, read a whole lot of books, that a white traveler would be somehow treated differently. And I know personally, if somebody came and knocked on my door and said, you know what, I'm from Holland and I need a place to stay, chances are higher that I'd open the door to them than if a fellow African came and knocked and said, you know what, I'm from Angola or somewhere and I'm traveling. And I was surprised that, you know what, I went and I traveled, and strangers, people I didn't know, opened their doors, gave me food, gave me shelter. And I think that is what I was looking for if I'd be treated the same. And
one would have expected that you would depict your travel experiences photographically, like you give a photographic account of your travel experiences, but then you decided to do it in a memoir, a kind of format. Why did you decide to do that? A friend, on my farewell dinner before I left, some friends had a farewell dinner for me, and one of them said, you know what, why don't you write? And so during the trip, I was taking notes. I'm not a writer by background, but as I was going through the trip, I was taking notes, and by the time I came back, I think I had more notes than pictures. The pictures served to help me when I was writing, but it was also just a different way. I mean, with Instagram and all forms of social media, you can put out all these pictures, but I think words also leave a lot to the imagination for people to think about. Of all the countries you've traveled, which one is your favorite and least favorite? Uganda is my favorite. Can start with how cheap food is. And I loved the hustle and bustle of being in Kampala. I mean, you've got motorbikes going in and out of every street. It just seemed to be so alive. I was there for nearly 2 weeks, and I really felt like this is it. Now I'm really out there. In terms of least favorite, I don't have a least favorite. I mean, no, I don't. I really enjoyed. I mean, I would put Egypt maybe at the bottom if I was to rank them, As the least favorite? Yes. Why so? What is it that you didn't particularly like about them?
When you travel, or before you experience something, we all have a certain stereotype or a certain image about a place. And Egypt, for me, it didn't live up to what I thought it would be. I don't want to spoil it for people, but from the pyramids to just the experiences that I had, and that was just me personally. I'm sure other people have great experiences, but for me, it turned out to be not as great as, for example, being in Uganda or being in Sudan.
Is there a particular pattern or trend that you've witnessed in all the countries that I've been through in terms of being welcoming to foreigners or foreign travelers in all the countries?
Generally, they are welcoming. I mean, it is Egypt. I mean, it lives on tourism, especially in Cairo. So their arms are wide open as long as your pockets are deep enough. Their arms will be wide open. Sudan is pretty difficult to get into, but once you're in there, they are. It was. I mean, if I can tell you a story. Given that I am black, and in Sudan, the areas there were black people, they didn't understand why a black person could not speak their language. So it was a bit of, we had a bit of tense moments. But once they understood that, I'm not from around, they were very open. So generally, most countries are open when they find out that, you're a tourist and you're coming through.
And the title is quite catchy, Through a Black Iris. What is a black iris and what did you mean by that?
I was playing on the pun of, through the eyes of a black person. Hence, I was trying to work with the words and we settled on Through a Black Iris. Because a lot of the books that I've read have titles such as Blood River. They are very dark titles about Africa. And I wanted this to be slightly different and to show that it's also through the perspective of a black African man.
Okay. And what are some of the highlights that you single out that you've experienced in those countries?
I can start with Sudan, for example. I arrived in a town called Dongola. It's about 400, 500 kilometers from the capital. And this was towards the end of the day. And I needed to register. So when you arrive in Sudan, you need to register with some form of central authority that as a visitor, I have arrived in this country. And after like half an hour of trying to find somebody who can speak English and, going around, eventually some guy in a tuk-tuk took me to a police station. And the police, the one guy was like, you know what, the place you're looking for doesn't exist anymore here. You have to go to the capital, but I don't know where you're going to sleep tonight. But before you do that, he called his wife and she prepared the meals. Like, I don't know what you're going to eat tonight, but you know what, here, have a meal. Jeez. And right there in the police station, we sat down, 3 men, his son, and we all had a meal. And I was just like, I didn't ask for this, but you know what? This is surprising because out of all the places, I didn't expect to experience that in Sudan. So that was one of the key moments for me.
So can you safely say that through this book, you were able to find the true definition of being African?
Given I only went through 13 countries, I won't say yes because, there's 54 countries and each one is different. But I'd like to think that it gave me an inkling of a tinkling of what it means to be African, to be open, to be welcoming, to be kind. Yes, I'd like to say just a bit.
And what lessons have you learned?
The most important one personally was not to overplan when going on such a long trip. I planned down to the T, like everything was scheduled to 2 days here, 3 days here. And as the trip progressed, things turned upside down. You find yourself stuck somewhere or you find yourself without money or something goes wrong. So I learned to be more flexible when planning such endeavors.
Did you have any fears?
Lots. I'm not going to lie. Starting from the moment I arrived in Egypt, I had fears. I was scared. I was alone. So it's the first trip that I did by myself. And at some moments in the 2 weeks I was in Egypt, I nearly bought a ticket to come back home.
But then other than that, bravo to you, eh?
Bravo
to you, eh? All right, thanks for chatting to us this morning.
Thank you for having me.
That's Alick Chingapi. He's the consultant by trade and an aspiring writer and an African traveler. He's been speaking to us about his debut read that depicts his travel through the continent in a quest to find the true essence that makes us African. All this is contained in his memoir or a travelogue that he told Through a Black Iris. All right, this is Morning Live. We'll take a short break. We'll be right back.